Today we're heading to North Canterbury and a classic multi-day tramp. Let's talk about the St James Walkway. Kia ora and welcome to The Tramping Life, a podcast about hiking in Aotearoa, New Zealand, or as we call it here, tramping. I'm Chauncey, and in this episode I'll talk about a specific track or hut. I'll give an overview and share my experience, along with the highlights and some practical advice. The St James Walkway is a 66-kilometre tramp through Lewis Pass Scenic Reserve, St James Station pastoral lease, and Lake Sumner Forest Park. It's typically walked over 4 to 5 days, and when it was developed in 1981, it was one of the first walkways established in the high country. The walkway forms a near loop from the Lewis Pass Road, State Highway 7 in Lewis Pass, and finishes at Boyle Village, which are about 20 minutes drive apart. It is suitable for people with moderate fitness and some tramping experience. The route traverses expansive high country valleys, beech forest, river flats, and 2 relatively low passes. Parts of the walkway follow old farm and mustering routes from the historic St James Station, which was purchased by the Crown in 2008 and incorporated into the conservation area. One of the key appeals of the St James Walkway is its sense of scale and openness. The wide valleys and relatively gentle gradients allow for long, steady days with often expansive views. I walked it at the end of March 2025, which was an ideal time of year with pleasant hiking temperatures and very few people around. The last 2 huts on the walkway are on the Te Araroa. Most walkers come through this area in the summer. Lewis Pass is a beautiful part of New Zealand. From here, the track heads north through classic New Zealand beech forest. I'd spend the day following the right branch of the Maria River. Cannibal Gorge was named after remains were found of people eaten alive after a battle and is now crossed by a number of suspension bridges. The bush occasionally opened up to views of the mountains, with the Freiburg Range to the west and Spencer Mountains to the east. There was a fair amount of bird life, including South Island robins, fantails, and a pair of riflemen. There were a number of streams to cross, easy now but more challenging after heavy rain, and the track ran alongside the main river at points. Cannibal Gorge Hut was a welcome sight, and the first hut I visited which had triple-level bunk beds. The most scenic part of the day followed as the track wove between bush, flats and by the river, with impressive views of the surrounding mountains. I finished the day at Ada Pass Hut, an attractive spot with great views of the Spencer Mountains, which mark the border with Nelson Lakes National Park. The next day I walked over the imperceptible 1,008-metre Ada Pass. Coming down, there were a number of Canada geese around, though fewer than I'd expected based on what others had told me about the walkway. There was a fair amount of bird life along the track. At one point there were 4 fantails flicking around me, and when I stopped for some food I was joined by 2 inquisitive South Island robins. There are wonderful views along the valley by the Ada River. Christopher Culler's hut is an attractive 4-bunk hut, though mostly replaced in use by the new Christopher Hut 1 kilometre away. This was a lovely place to spend the night with stunning views from the deck, and for a second night I had the place to myself. An added bonus was seeing a herd of the famous St James horses grazing nearby. The following day, where the Ada and Waiu rivers merged, the track got narrow and quite overgrown in places, but offered lovely valley views, and things got easier when it joined a 4-wheel drive track for a stretch. There was a decent bridge to cross over the Henry River, and it was a relief to finally see Ann Hut in the distance. The comments scratched under the hut name about it being the most exposed hut in New Zealand seemed understandable, though for my money that would be Syme Hut on Mount Taranaki. Ann Hut was the best of the hike so far. It had double glazing, 2 bunk rooms, lines for drying clothes and 2 toilets. It can also be extremely busy, judging by the hut intentions book, as it lies on the Te Araroa. Here I met the first hikers in 3 days, both Te Araroa walkers. One was a local from Richmond near Nelson, doing the TA in sections. He stayed the night in the other bunk room. The other was an American walking the TA South Island from south to north. He left about 2 p.m. to walk another 22 kilometres to Waiu Hut. TA walkers are a different breed of hiker. The penultimate day was the longest, taking 6 hours to walk about 17 kilometres through a mixture of open valley and attractive bush, while steady rain encouraged a good pace to finish the following day at Boyle Village. Leaving Ann Hut at dawn, there was an incredible sunrise filling the sky with colour. Despite the dry of early autumn, there was still mud around. This section was the worst of the hike. In winter or spring, I can see this being a very muddy and boggy track to walk that would be wonderfully scenic with snow on the surrounding hills. The track headed into bush and uphill over the 1,136 metre Ann Saddle. An enjoyably flowing section followed, downhill through wonderful bush with large patches of moss before returning to open valley. It was a relief to reach the old but attractive Rugby Hut, which was a perfect spot for lunch. After which there was only about an hour left to walk to reach Boyle Flat Hut, a nice place to spend the final night, particularly sitting on the window seats. It would be less enjoyable visited in January or early February, though, when large numbers of TA walkers come through, with over 30 people staying in the 14-bunk hut on multiple occasions. This may be different in the future, with the hut now on the hut booking system. There was no water at Boyle Flat Hut. The tank had been dry for several weeks due to a lack of rain, but less than 50 metres away was a lovely creek. This was the ideal spot to fill up in water and have a quick wash, a refreshing if freezing experience. The next day saw the start of an atmospheric river system, which brought torrential rain to the upper South Island for the next 3 days. Thankfully, the rain was steady, but hadn't been going long enough to cause any issues getting out from the tramp. I'd spoken to people who'd hiked the St James Walkway 6 months before, and they'd spent an extra unplanned day without any spare food on the track due to heavy rain and impassable creek crossings. Final day out from Boyle Flat Hut was the easiest of the hike, with the track mostly downhill and graded in places to great walk quality, though less so in others. Most of it was spent in the bush, which provided welcome shelter from the rain, but there were a few open sections offering misty views. It was great to reach Boyle Village, which isn't really a village, and the Boyle Outdoor Education Centre, who transferred my car from Lewis Pass. They do cheese-laden pizzas, which tasted amazing after 5 days of dehydrated meals. Some of the highlights include that the St James Walkway has a wonderful sense of scale, with large sections following river flats and the surrounding mountains are a frequent sight. There's also a sense of history. The track passes through what was once St James Station, a large high country pastoral lease. Remnants of farming infrastructure remain visible in places, and the open valley landscapes reflect that pastoral history. Finally, the huts are varied and memorable and well spaced out. To finish with some practical advice, book the huts. All the main huts now need to be booked all year round. Anne Hut and Boyle Flat Hut being on the TA are particularly popular. There are a couple of basic huts that don't need to be booked, Christopher Culler's Hut and Rugby Hut. Due to the relatively low passes, the St James Walkway is a good option for a winter tramp, but do be prepared for mud and potentially snow, and parts of the track can become impassable after heavy rain, so do check the forecast before setting off. Finally, the car park on Lewis Pass Road is a common starting point, but the car park is notorious for vandalism, unfortunately. It's best to use the car relocation service from Boyle Outdoor Education Centre. They'll relocate your car to their place. Thank you so much for listening to The Tramping Life. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please follow the podcast in whatever app you use. Tell a friend about it and consider leaving a rating or a review. It really helps more people discover the show. If you have any questions or feedback, I'd love to hear from you. Drop me an email at thetrampinglife, one word, @gmail.com.